Hello and welcome to another episode of the CG Garage. This is episode number 394 with Angie Jones, animation supervisor and just all-around, all-purpose person that does so many things, including education, crypto NFTs, which actually we didn't get into the crypto NFTs, but she does a whole bunch of cool stuff, and it was really awesome talking to her. She and I actually worked on Stealth together way back in the day, and I actually haven't seen her since then, but it was really great catching up with her. She's got an incredible career, and it was really fun to find out a little bit about her past and how she got to where she is. Kristen, what do you think of Angie?
Yeah, well, she's had a very exciting career. She's like already over 20 years of experience just as a character animator, supervisor, team leader in film, of games and commercials. She's done so much. And like you said, she's worked on just a lot of things, one being Stuart Little, which she talks about a little bit in this podcast, Freddy versus Jason, The Cave, National Treasure, just to name a few. And she also explains that her LinkedIn looks like a Twitter page just because it's packed with stuff. So yeah, she's written books, also been a professor. So it's just an interesting podcast, and she has so much passion in what she does and loves it. And it's going to be exciting just to see what other amazing work she has, and hopefully, I think she'll come on again.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd be curious to see. I mean, she talked about one time she was both getting a degree and teaching and working at the same time.
Yeah.
Like, that's crazy. That's crazy. Yeah. She's really kind of a very, very ambitious person. And that's what's kind of the cool thing about her. And, animation is a big part of it. And it's really cool to talk about all the great stuff as an animator that she's done. So cool. We got a couple of announcements. First thing is, mentioned this several times, but V-Ray 6 for Maya is out. It includes all the cool stuff that V-Ray 6 for Max has, including V-Ray Enmesh, finite dome lights, procedural clouds, but also has great stuff like enhanced USD support. And it's got a new profiler that allows you to sort of debug some of your renders and find out exactly where the slowdown that might be happening. But speaking of optimization, we can also do things like make things 30% faster in our fog rendering. That's just built in. And also translucent materials are rendering twice as fast these days. So lots of great stuff inside of V-Ray 6 for Maya. So go check that out. If you're interested in V-Ray for SketchUp or Rhino, those are in public beta right now. So you can go check that out as well. But I think they're coming out very soon. So go definitely check our website to see when that's happening. Okay, we've got a couple of announcements. September is, we're only already well through September. We still have several things going on at the end. Go ahead, Kristen, tell us what's going on.
All right, so you can find these out at chaos.com/events. The last couple in September are September 26th through 30th. Chaos will be at 3D Base Camp in Vancouver. And then September 27th through 29th, Chaos will be at Autodesk University in New Orleans. And now, beginning of October 4th, we will have a free webinar, which is Create Without Limits with V-Ray 6 for Maya. So you can just learn about all the new features in that. And again, find these out at chaos.com/events.
Perfect. Yeah, that's a great way to, if you want to learn more about V-Ray 6 for Maya, go check out that seminar on October 4th, which could be pretty cool. So make sure and sign up for that. Again, go to chaos.com/events to find out more on that. Okay, if people want to know more about the podcast, Kristen, where can they go?
You can go to facebook.com/CG Garage Podcast or chaos.com/CG Garage. And if you'd like to watch us, go to youtube.com/Chaos Group TV.
Perfect. And if you guys have any other ideas of podcasts or comments about this one or anything you'd like to let us know, including telling us we're doing a good job, which hopefully we still are, you can always email us, labs@chaos.com. But for now, please enjoy episode number 394 with Angie Jones.
Welcome to another CG Garage where the Chaos Group talks. You'll know it's over when the last bucket drops. We're gonna fire off rays in high dynamic range. We know that ambient occlusion is passé. Global illumination won't lead you astray. And while image-based lighting is really swell, you need to make sure everything has Fresnel.
I believe you and I worked together a long time ago, believe it or not.
Yeah, I tried to look at our LinkedIn to see because it's been so long. I think it might
Yeah.
have been Stealth at DD,
Yep.
unless you remember
Yep.
sooner than that. Um,
Do you work on iRobot as well?
I almost did. I was at Rhythm and Hughes working on
Okay.
the cat and the dog and the gecko and Narnia and different things like that over that time.
Got it. Got it. Yeah, but I do. Yes, I do remember Stealth for sure. And I think you and I worked on a couple of shots together at some point.
Yeah.
but that was a long time ago. So cool. So I'd like to know, obviously, you've been a very influential person in the world of animation, and you've done a lot of amazing things to be very active in the community. And but I really want to know what sort of got you motivated about animation in the first place. What was sort of thing that sort of was the thing that started that spark in you for that career?
So I am from Atlanta, Georgia, and I went to Atlanta College of Art, which now is SCAD.
Right.
SCAD ate up my school, but it was very much a fine arts school, so it's kind of weird. My path is not. I didn't grow up reading comic books like many of the people that I work with, and wanted to be an animator since I was 4. I just wanted to get paid to draw and be creative in some way. So at Atlanta College of Art, I remember the first time I ever thought, I might want to do that this is how old I am. So I saw A Nightmare Before Christmas. That's the name of it, right? And
Yeah.
I didn't even know what stop mo was. And I was not a stop mo animator, but I just thought, oh, this looks so cool. I think I want to do something like this. And yeah, I'm kind of old. So at that time when I was in art school, we were using Amigas and some Macs to paint stuff by the pixel and things like that. It wasn't like we really had animation tools just yet. There were really only 3 animation schools at the time. There was Ringling, Sheridan, and CalArts. And so what I was doing is more video production stuff and just learning about the computer. And my degree was called Electronic Arts at that time.
Right.
So that's how I kind of got into it, I guess. I was working in Atlanta after I graduated for Coca-Cola and Turner Communications. And then I worked on a TV show called Reality Check, which had Ryan Seacrest, who also was from Atlanta, on it. And it was like a children's TV show. And it was really funny because most of the guys, this shows you back then, it almost took an artist and a technician to do the job.
Sure.
We were on SGIs, and a lot of the guys were graduates from Georgia Tech. So they called me Art Girl because I was drawing everything with the stylus, and I animated things like Mary Had a Little Lamb, just stuff like that. But it was all in programs, old TV programs like Hi-Res QFX. Gosh, I can't even remember half the programs we used, but they were paint programs for television. And
Sure.
then it wasn't challenging enough. I wanted to do more character work, and I really didn't know what to do next. So a friend of mine from high school, actually my best friend since 6th grade, she lived in San Diego. So I was coming out to visit her, and I set up an interview, 4 of them in LA and 1 in San Diego. And the first interview I went on was in San Diego. And she even came on the interview with me. We were so young. And so I started working at a company called Lightspan Entertainment, which was a educational video game company that made video games for the schools, for kids to learn from K through,
Okay.
I think K through 12 even. So I did that for 3 years. I learned how to surf, and I got really comfortable in California because it was a very different vibe. And then the real the real gig that I got in animation. And I say the real gig because up until that point, I'd only used 3D Studio Max and 2D programs. And then I got a job at Oddworld, which is Lorne Lanning and Sherry McKenna's company, who came from Rhythm and Hues, started their video game company up in San Luis Obispo. And I worked on the Oddworld games on a SGI again, but this time with characters. And so that's when I really got schooled on how production works and how to build stuff. So, yeah.
Yeah. Oddworld was that's a great story. I mean, there was such an interesting stuff going on over there at that time. So around what year was that, would you say?
So from 95 to 98, I was in San Diego. And then 98 to 2000, I spent at Oddworld. And I worked on Abe's Exodus and a little bit of Munch's Odyssey. And yeah, we produced a lot of work with a very small team. It was really intense, but I learned more from Lorne in those 2 years than I had learned in the 5 years preceding up until that point,
right.
School and everything else. It was a nice introduction to California too, because it's so pretty up there. And I had a beautiful house right on the PCH that was all glass. And it was a really innocent time, let's say.
Sure. Yeah. It's really pretty up there. I mean, it's only Obispo is right between Pismo Beach and Morro Bay. It's just really pretty up there for sure. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I can imagine that must have been good. And is this sort of when you really started to sink your teeth into character animation at that point as well?
Yeah, definitely. I really took to the facial, which is something that they were trying to develop. People don't understand it. I know I'm going to sound like, okay, we walk through the snow every day to get to school, but our stuff was so heavy. I sat next to the main rendering guy, Eric Antonovich, and he had to write a bat file to re-evoke Maya after every frame because Maya would crash after it would render one frame of the stuff we were doing. The facial, the characters were so heavy, we couldn't actually work interactively like people do today. So I was coming up with ways that I could create the right shape and the right pose for each phonetic sound so that the characters really looked like they were saying what they were saying, because we couldn't scrub like you do now and sure. Hear it speaking. I even gave a talk at GDC, I was so young, about our facial systems that we had built there. And it was a really a big growth spurt for me technically, because I had learned a lot creatively up until that point, but had not learned much technically. And we had to do a lot of scripting to make the stuff work back then.
Right. Yeah. And a lot's changed, I'm sure, but we'll get to that as well. Okay. So you spent 2 years there, and then what happened after that?
So then I had been up there for a while, and a relationship I had kind of fallen apart, and I'm all alone up in San Luis Obispo, and there's not a whole lot to do. And I wanted to move to, I really was too scared of LA, I think, at that point. I had grown up in Atlanta and was still a bit sheltered. So I thought, I went to a wedding in San Diego, and literally, I can't believe I did this. This is what the Wild West is like back then. So Oddworld had a lot of clout at that time. It was the game. It was the game because not only was it fun to play, which is very important to your gamers, but it was beautiful. And it was pushed the boundaries of what characters could be and do within a game. And then the cinematics, of course. So I'm driving and back, everything, yeah. Right. So I'm driving back after a wedding, and I'm going through Carlsbad, and I know that Angel Studios is there, which is Diego Angel. Angel Studios is now Rockstar. But back then, which it's like 2000, year 2000, I just stopped. I had no demo reel. I was dressed like for weekend wedding kind of dress. And I went in and I asked to speak to the recruiter, and they took me back to her. I'll never forget. Her name was Julie Liss. And I sat down and I told her, you know what? It's nothing against Oddworld. I just want to come back to San Diego. I'm just by myself up on a hill in Cayucas, and I want to live somewhere where there's more people and more social things to do. And she goes, okay. And then Diego came in, and Diego's Colombian, and he's just very, he's very shoots from the hip. So he came in, he set a piece of paper down. He's like, these, not these. And he's talking about signage for SIGGRAPH. And then Julie introduces me, and she says she'd like to join us. She's coming from Oddworld. He just looked at me and he goes, give her what she wants, and walked out of the room. So I was like, okay. So I gave myself a 20% raise. Sorry, Julie.
Nice.
And they put me in charge of the 6 games that were under the roof at that time, which was the main game was Dino Crisis 3. And then they had RDR, because they were working with Capcom at the time, had Red Dead Redemption. That was the first one, right? Revolver Redemption.
Red Dead Redemption?
That's the first one, right? I always mix them up. All right. And then we had a bunch of racing games, TRW Surf, and then Off-Road, Midnight Run, Smuggler's Run. I think that's 6 right there. So then they were sending me back and forth between Capcom Osaka and staying there in San Diego, kind of overseeing the animation, making sure we're raising the bar on all of the animation in the studio.
Sure.
But for me, the character work just wasn't challenging enough. I still wanted to do more with performance. And Jeremy Cantor was a friend of mine at Sony, and he said, why don't you come up here? And I was like, you think? And he's like, yeah. So I talked to Sony about Stuart Little 2, and this is just on the cusp of 2001, I think. And so I ended up leaving games entirely. It was mostly, that was a huge difference between Oddworld and Angel 2, not just because I was in charge of all those games and much more responsibility, but they were really violent games, you know? Right. And I had been working on Oddworld, where you had to possess another character in order to even have a gun. And so it was just a total different vibe. So in 2001, that's when I worked on my very first movie. And that was a completely different vibe as well, because people were older and we're on a lot, and we're working on something really big. Like, not that the games weren't big, but it just felt bigger in the production. More people, more infrastructure, more tools, more just, and most importantly for me, story. If you're not fulfilling the story in a film, you've lost. But with games, it's really tilted where gameplay is the directive and art and programming are at the bottom. But with film, story, your art and everything else must serve the story. And so I felt a little more valuable within the creative aspect of what I was doing as an animator.
Sure. Sure. Yeah, I can imagine how that's really the case. And I was going to ask you, like, did you feel more valuable as working in films, because animation is the key part of it and is not as important necessarily in film and in games in the same way, right?
Yeah. I mean, the thing is, I didn't know this until I got into it, because I should say I don't play games. I don't have the mental muscle. Like, I can't play them. So the hardcore gamers or game designers that I would work with, many times they play games that don't look that great, but they're fun to play. And that's why they love it. So, it definitely, once I was working in film, it wasn't punch, kick, die. It was thinking, feeling, acting, performing, characters that had motivations and, deep emotions. And I have throughout my career gone back and forth between the sweet and the deadly. And that's kind of been on purpose, because after you work on something that's really, really cute and sweet, you just want to kill something or beat something up, So it's kind of fun to go back and forth between that as well. But definitely felt a huge relief creatively once I moved to film.
Okay. Awesome. So what are some of the, obviously you started off with, you said Stuart Little 2, right? That was your first feature?
That was my first feature. And it was an interesting time as well, because there were 60 men and me for like the first, I think, 6 to 8 months of the project. And most of these men came from Disney, and now they got to animate with a microwave, because they basically have been animating pencil to paper their entire career. So now to them, they have to go beep, boop, boop, boop. And out of those 60 or so men, maybe 10% had even sent an email or used a computer at that point, because even email was pretty new. So it was definitely interesting, both with the male dominated, experience, as well as I was one of the few that had been using a computer since the 90s. So the people within the tech anim space at Sony certainly knew how to use a computer, but the animators that they hired, they had Tony Bancroft and Eric Armstrong as our co-directors even, which again follows that same line where they wanted to have one person kind of batten for the traditional animation team, and another person, Eric, who came from ILM, batting for the whole digital computer animation side and more visual effectsy side of things. They didn't feel like one guy could handle it all, especially with that team. We had a lot of tech animators that had to fix things for poses, which is really good for animators, in my opinion. We had a very animation friendly structure. If you made a pose and the pose looked really good to camera, CG had to fix it. Like if feathers were exploding, like say I had my hand on my hip like this, and I'm Margalo, which is Stuart Little's little girlfriend. Right. If the feathers are exploding, it's like, too bad. That's the pose. That's the pose we want. And you didn't have to compromise your work because the tech couldn't handle it. It was expected that the poor tech guys had to fix it. Right. Which was really nice, because we started pushing what a rig could do. And I don't know when Madagascar came out, but it must have been close about that same time, where that was the first movie I really saw people going off model with their characters and creating something that was closer to the traditional circles. So all these guys knew in their head, because they've been doing it hand drawn for years, how to take a character off model and bring it back and not make it look like it's made of Play-Doh. And so they pushed the riggers to create rigs that could do these things.
Right.
And Stuart didn't even go off model that much, because we had the plate. And I find many shows, when you have a live action plate, they don't want the character to get too cartoony, or else then it doesn't feel like it lives in that world, Sure.
Yeah, unless you're doing Roger Rabbit or something like that, where it's
well, and that's traditional, and that's the charm of the line and the hand-drawn stuff. I think you can get away with more with that. Sure. It's something when I teach, I try and get across to my students, like even Scooby-Doo, which is in a live action plate, we did go off model and do some crazy stuff with him, but there were limits of what they would allow us to do, just because it starts to look like, ooh, does that fit?
Right.
If you have 100% CG and then you have super cartoony characters, you can do some really kooky stuff.
Yeah, which is fun. Yeah, which is really cool. I do remember some of the stories. I mean, I remember specifically when they were trying to retrain a bunch of the traditional animators to do stuff in CG, and it was a real challenge for them in certain cases. I do remember someone actually telling me a story about they were helping someone come up with animating a person. This person was just doing a shot of the person walking from the background to the foreground, and they didn't know how to think in Z space, so they just scaled the person up as they were.
Yeah. So I was in a room. I'm dropping so many names, and all these people hopefully won't mind. But I was in a room with Roger Vizard, Mike Polvani, and Troy Saliba. And all three of those guys, Troy had done a little bit, I think, in Texas at, was it called DNA? I think it's called Real Effects now. Yeah. But most of them had never really worked in CG. And I remember Mike, he would not look in the graph editor at the curves. It just looked like spaghetti to him. And he couldn't understand why he had pops. So I finally went over and looked at his desk, and I moved the Y curve, and then the arm would go up and down. And he started to understand, oh, that's manipulating how it moves.
Right.
And so, the poor guys were just thrown in the deep end and had to sort of figure it out. And my experience was like, if you had three guys, one guy would get it right away, one guy would get it and be kind of slow, and one guy just could never, ever get it. And just part of that is standing in your own way, don't want to learn. Like, I don't want to learn Blender. Damn it. I just don't want to. And it's just, I already know some tools that work right now. Please don't make me learn Blender. Sure. But that can be a problem too. Right.
Yeah, I mean, we're all going to have to face that at some point. We're all going to be the old person in the room.
We've been very lucky that Maya has been the tool for over 20 years,
Right. Yeah, I don't think Maya is going to necessarily go away as an animation tool for sure. It's going to, it's still very powerful in that area, and very well adapted to the environment. Okay, well, that's interesting. Okay, so that was interesting, sort of thinking about that. So what were some of your favorite projects and favorite films you worked since then, and where are some of the cool places that you've been at?
So Stuart will always hold a special place for me because it was the first film. Yeah, and I got to work with some amazing people from Disney that I never thought I would even ever meet. It was all new. I was so young, all that stuff. So that holds a big, and I think it was a good movie to start on because it was a sequel. So they knew exactly how he acts. Like he thinks he's a person. So anytime someone reminds him he's a mouse, he becomes smaller and a little more mouse-like and tiny. And then another one is Pan's Labyrinth. I really enjoyed working on that. The fairies and the stick bugs were the main things that I worked on. And I did...
was that a Cafe FX as well?
That was Cafe FX. And I did, for half of the time, commute up there, which is funny because I started up in San Luis Obispo.
Yeah, I know. I was going to say that.
And then now I'm in Santa Maria, and they put me up like in a hotel for a little bit, and then they put me in a condo, and I still was driving back every Sunday. So it's hard maintaining two residences. It really is. But it was really fun. The one scene that I'm most proud of is when she changes. She's a stick bug, and Ophelia is showing her the story in the book. And I used two references for this. I used Bibbidi Bobbidi Boo for Cinderella when she looks at her hands as she's changing. Right. And I used $1 Million Baby for like a crink at the neck because GDT wanted, these are not Tinkerbell. Right. I can't do his accent, but he's like, this is not Tinkerbell. He would say, no lie, I'll cuss. He said, I want people to shit their pants when they see these fairies, I was like, okay. But yeah, he wanted people to be afraid of him. So she cricks her neck right after she changes. And it's pretty dark. I don't know if you can see it in the shot. But I had her sort of, as she starts to change and her wings fold back into becoming the fairy from the stick bug, I made her look at her hands. I think she just looks at one and she goes like this, and then she goes crick, and then she turns into the fairy. And those are little things that animators, steal, use, find that they can incorporate to make something look genuine and sincere and idiosyncratic to the character.
Yeah.
And so that was a lot of fun. And of course, it just was a really high level of storytelling and filmmaking and everything else. There are shows that I worked on that are not the best film in the world, but I had the most fun of my life. My time at Cinesight Hollywood was hilarious and fun and crazy, and it was short, but I worked on X-Men 2 and Freddy versus Jason.
Nice.
2 very different movies.
Yep.
And I remember interviewing, it was right after Stuart, and I was all excited. Ooh, what am I going to work on next? And Jeff Baksinski is like, so we need you to animate a tail. And I'm like, a tail? Oh, man, I want to animate characters,
Right.
I'm so happy I took that job because I feel like it's such a pivotal movie in visual effects history. Mm-hmm. And it's the first 2 minutes of the movie of Nightcrawler's tail. And yep. I met so many amazing people because at that time it was weird. Like Centropolis ended up there, and DD and Sony, and it was just a nice mix of people at that time. And then after that, I did Freddy versus Jason, where I did a Freddy caterpillar that's smoking a hookah. Yeah. Among other things. So that was just fun for the stick of it or whatever.
Right.
Yeah. So like I said, back and forth between the sweet and the deadly.
Yeah. That's awesome. Well, that's really cool. Now, obviously you were, we were at DD for a little bit. I think you were only there for Stealth then, it must have been, or maybe a couple more.
Oh, no. I was at DD for like 4 years.
Okay.
But mostly on the commercial side. So Fred Ramundi and I were working on all the Disney spots, which is hilarious. It's the 50th anniversary, and we spent almost 3 years working on the 50th anniversary, which was a big deal for DD at that time because people even then were still trying to figure out how to make these characters that could go off model and do what traditional can do, which is anything. Sure. So we had the Holy Trinity, Mickey, Donald, Goofy, Cinderella, Iago, like 12 or 15 Disney characters in these commercials. Right. And so the first one, oh gosh, now I'm blanking out. I remember the commercial director. Oh, it was F-bombs all the time. And he looked like Santa, but a mean Santa. It was like the highest paid commercial director. It's probably good. I can't remember his name. Right. And then after that, Eric Goldberg was the animation director. And I just felt so fortunate to have an opportunity to work with him. Right. So, yeah, I was hired and then I'd be let go on a Friday and go out with my friends. And then the very next Monday, can you come back in? Right. So it was like permalance for about 4 years. The only other features, I did Zoom Academy. Oh, right. Yeah. Really, really bad movie, but
well, come on. You and I worked on Stealth together. So
yeah. Yeah. That was just planes for me. But again, girls got to eat. You got to keep working.
Yep. Yeah, I do remember that. Yeah, it was fun. It was interesting. But it's a challenging thing though. I'm not necessarily going to defend or we need to talk about Stealth too much, but animating a plane to look correct and to camera to look correct was challenging to do actually.
And Joel was a pilot.
Yeah, he was.
And it was so funny. I remember the first time he was telling me what to do, and this thing's doing Mach 3, right? And he's going, I want it to go. And he was going really slow like this. And the guy's writing stuff down. And I'm like, what is upside down, bank left and then bank right. But I learned I would drive him crazy. I'd say I moved the little flappy thingies. I never knew all the technical terms, I say when I landed it on the barge boat thing, I moved the flappy thingies the right way. He'd be like, okay, Angie, thank you.
Yep. That's funny.
Yeah, I'm not the most technical when it comes to planes, but I know what looks good.
Sure.
Right.
Yep. Absolutely. What is actually one of the more challenging things that you had to animate in your career? What's the one that really sort of...
I'll tell you the hardest damn thing I've ever animated. Oh my God. It was on Smurfs. I went back to Sony, worked for Troy, who used to sit next to me the 20 years previous, or I think at this time it might have been 12 years later.
Okay.
First of all, Smurfs movie, there's a billion of them in every shot, right?
Right.
But I got the shot where Gargamel is holding a stick. So this is Hank Azaria.
Okay.
And he has a stick, and there are 8 Smurfs holding on to each other, leg to hand, like a chain of Smurfs off the stick, with Papa on the top. All right? And this is live action. So Hank Azaria is going, you belong to me. And he's moving it. Yeah. He's moving it like this. You belong to me. So he's going side to side. Right. They want them to do this. Oh, did I mention there's a vortex behind them trying to suck them into Central Park? So I have to simulate them floating. And it's like Papa holding on to Fett by arms. And then Fett is holding, who knows, Grumpy's leg. And then Grumpy's holding, they're all connected. So it's all IK.
Right.
And I have to make them go up and down, even though Hank Azaria is moving his stick side to side. I have to make it look convincing. And I have to make it feel kind of tethered because the vortex and the wind behind them is pulling them. And it's just physics times 10. And I got it looking really, really good, right? And then I go into, for those of your viewers who don't know, so we have dailies in the morning. Yep. Where everyone's half asleep. It's 8:30 in the morning, and the director's got a pen light pointing out everything they want changed.
Right.
Then you have Sweatbox in the afternoon, which is called Sweatbox because if you get 4 grown men in a small room, it gets sweaty. And so there's this smaller TV, and I'm in there with the producer, Troy, the director, my lead, and somebody else. And my lead looks at me, and then he looked at the windows, and we're on the 2nd floor, and he goes, are those locked? And I looked at him, I go, do you think I'm going to jump? He goes, yeah, because they wanted me to move all of it screen right because they didn't have enough plate to move the camera, right?
Oh, my God.
Right?
Yes.
So they're all connected with IK, and they're all animated. And now they want me to move that monster. So I managed to do it. But yeah, that was from a technical animator from every standpoint. It's funny. Sony also gave me another hard one on Stuart Little. This is crazy. I cannot believe that Rob Minkoff had poor little George do this. So the soccer ball comes towards camera. This is on my demo reel. And Stuart Little is stuck to the front of the soccer ball. And he's going, ah, and then you go into his mouth as he's coming towards camera. Minkoff made George kick the soccer ball to camera. So I can't even imagine how many takes that took for that little boy to kick the soccer ball perfectly to camera. Right. But then the soccer ball is spinning too fast because Stuart would just fly off the soccer ball spinning like that. So first of all, they had a little bit of plate, so we pulled out so we could create some parallax by moving the camera tighter on the plate as it moved towards camera. So that's a fake. Everything's smoke and mirrors, by the way. Right. And then we had a CG soccer ball that you just turn like that much. So it just revealed Stuart Little as it's coming towards camera. And that was just tricky. Plus, we had to slow down the shot because it was only 30 frames and they needed at least 60.
Right.
So yeah, it's always those technical fake you out kind of things. Things that everybody thinks is going to be easy is always the hardest to do.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Yeah. For sure. I absolutely know what you mean. Absolutely. So what? Okay. So what are, obviously you've been doing this for a long time, and animation has changed quite a bit over time, right? Like how has the technology helped you, or changed things for you in some ways, either good or just different or bad? I don't know. Like, how has technology changed over the last 20 years in animation on the CG side of things?
So for a character animator, it's kind of funny. Those tools have not changed a whole lot from what I started using. The
Right.
timeline editor and the curves. I think what has helped is people have made tools that are specific to the workflow, and Maya has adopted them into it. I also, for a while there, I even went and worked for side effect software to make Houdini more artist friendly, like version 9, which was interesting.
Nice.
One of the first things I did, well, there were two things that stuck with me just trying to use Houdini. Is in Maya, the spacebar is a very important part of your workflow. It just takes you from close up to the whole viewport. And it's a mental muscle. And I kept hitting the spacebar and it does something crazy in Houdini. And I'd have like 6 men behind me and they're like, why do you keep doing that? I'm like, I'm sorry, it's part of what I do. And then the other thing, yeah. And then the Houdini curves, and I get it because like explosions are just like this, but you would never as an animator have curves that look like a heart rate monitor. That's
right.
You would never do that.
Right.
So you need to be able to sculpt and create the timing through the curve. And I had to, in Houdini, sculpt every single side. And I was like, this is crazy talk. Just grab the whole curve and spline it. And they were like, oh, really?
Right.
So I would say each tool is designed for who's using it. And I think what was interesting when I worked at Rhythm and Hues, they had just gotten IK. I can't even imagine. They did Scooby-Doo 1 with FK, and now we're getting into technical stuff that I don't know if your whole audience even
they know that. Yeah.
But to do a walk cycle of any kind in FK would be just so freaking hard.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and they had just gotten IK when I went there, so that was probably 2002 or 3, too. And
that's amazing because their animation at Rhythm and Hues is so good. I can't imagine.
But at that time, they were just doing this.
They were just doing. You're right.
Placing faces, so they had amazing real-time scrubbing for dialogue.
Right.
I was like, holy cow, Maya doesn't even have this. So the proprietary tools I find can be behind the mass-produced software, but they have what the studio needs at that time, right?
Sure.
I also remember the girl that wrote Voodoo wrote a motorcycle, and I can't believe they let her do that because they would have been screwed if anything had happened to her. But as far as dealing with the tools, I've been very lucky. Like I said, the past 25 years, not only has it been Maya predominantly, but it's been just a graph editor. And animators have it pretty easy in the sense that we're just we're loud because we're not deep in concentration trying to problem solve all the time. We're creating stuff and moving around, seeing how it looks, and waiting for feedback.
Sure.
That's been nice. The feedback loop has been a lot faster as the machines get faster. That's definitely been a big part.
Yeah, for sure. What are your thoughts on some of the motion capture and things of that nature, and how has that benefited? I mean, just curious to hear what your thoughts are on some of that and how has it affected your work.
So it's funny. I've purposely avoided it because I am truly a keyframe animator.
Right.
I should say right now I'm lead on Fortnite cinematics at Halon, and it's a big part of Epic's workflow. However, they don't really like everything that comes out of the mocap. They want a styly look. Fortnite has, it's not full Pixar, but it's not, photo real either. It's somewhere in between.
Sure.
So I think that's part of the reason Halon just hired me to come in and sort of push what they're doing beyond just what is in the mocap. The only mocap show I've worked on, and this is just because I really wanted to harken back to the beginning of our conversation, I wanted to be a puppeteer of some kind.
Sure.
I worked at Henson on mocapped Muppet stuff that Brian Henson, it was called the Scrumps. It was a very weird TV show.
Okay.
And that lasted me about 3 weeks. And I was just like, I don't like this. Because cleaning up mocap, you can imagine, that's not fun for anybody. I do think it's a tool. And
Sure.
it's a tool that I think is really good. Like, if this is kind of old dated too, but if you have the Die Hard game and you need Bruce Willis in it, okay, it makes sense. You mocap Bruce Willis. You literally have him. Or a basketball game and you want everybody to feel like they're really playing that character, or wrestling or whatever. But as a seasoned animator, I do believe I can produce stuff better and quicker. Of course, there's a lot of people in virtual production like Halon and Epic using Unreal that are really invested in it as a tool. So I just see it as that. It's a tool. I think it will always kind of look like someone's moving underneath, and there's not, I mean, why would you just take the mocap and not heighten the believability, the entertainment value, make it bigger? Otherwise, go shoot live action. If you're working in this capacity, you want to raise the entertainment level. And maybe if the guy jumps over a fence, he could jump a little higher and hang in the air a little longer than what's really able to happen, just to make it fun to watch.
I mean, like you were saying, the ability to go off model a little bit, right?
Yeah, well, and that's all style. That, there are so many styles. That's the biggest thing that has changed, in my opinion, as an animator. There was a time where I was hired to do whatever, and I didn't need to have it on my reel. But teaching, I've discovered the students today, if they are going to animate a deer, the people hiring them expect them to have a quad and hopefully a deer on their reel. So the competition is really fierce and specific. So I'm talking about content, but then you have the difference between Pan's Labyrinth and Scooby-Doo, Garfield, or even the Disney stuff. The styles range so far between, and you're going to be most marketable if you can just go, oh, you need a creature that's photorealistic? Sure, I can do that, no problem. But then the next week be able to animate a little dewdrop that is the Joy dishwashing liquid dewdrop jumping around like a Mexican jumping bean. You need to be able to go back and forth between these styles to stay employable.
Well, let's get into that a little bit, because I think this is fascinating and something that I've always, I think I remember having a conversation with you about this back at DD. That was just something that became very important back then. Animation is very special, right? Animation is about the personality of the person coming through into what they do, right? So the personality of that person, it's like acting in a lot of ways. You're bringing back the what's happening into the characters you're doing, or even the plane, or whatever context that you're animating. And at that time, as you are very well aware, and you've actually brought up, there weren't that many women in the industry who were doing animation. And this is something that you have brought to light in a lot of ways, and have sort of championed and have been a voice for that for quite so many years. And I think I'd like to know a little bit from your point of view, like how challenging has that been to try to communicate that piece of your character? Or do you think that there's these, how can we bring more of those voices into the world of animation?
So yeah, I mean, from the bottom to the top, if you want better stories for women, you need more women telling them. So
Yep.
that's the first thing. I will say it's encouraging. So I was a professor at USC for 7 years, and now I teach just online with animate. And I definitely have more females in my classes overall. And that's always good because then you're going to have more stories told from that point of view. I think there are plenty of men who have daughters that are trying to do just that as well. They want their daughters to have something that they can look at and identify with. I know the first 5 or 6 movies, even I'm sorry, I'm jumping ahead. So the first 5 or 6 movies that came out of Pixar, I was like, there's no females. Like they had, what was her name? Josie, which was supposed to be Woody's female counterpart, but she
Jessie.
was just sort of Jessie. Thank you. She was just sort of fluff and not really there. And, Barbie and Bo Peep weren't much either.
No.
So, yeah, it's been a while to my most favorite Disney movies are Mulan and Lilo and Stitch. And both of those were made in Florida when they were set up over there. So I guess what I'm saying is we definitely need to have more, Barbara Chapman is an example, more women telling the stories, coming into the industry and breaking through. It's a tough thing. I compare it to surfing because that was one of the first things I learned when I was in California. Like when you're novelty out there learning, everyone's really encouraging. But then once you start catching waves, your competition, right? And so things kind of shift and change. And so I never tried to be different or attract. Like I saw some girls post when Disney wrote that letter about how women should not be an animator. They posted on their door at Sony. I was like, that's not helping anything, Sure, that's the way it was in 1936 or whatever. But I try and just work as if, I'm just another human being trying to make good stuff. And I am very sensitive to those ideas within storytelling, though, and trying really hard to find ways to make strong female characters.
Yeah. I'm glad you said that. I'm also glad you brought up Barbara Chapman. She's been on this podcast before, actually, so she's really amazing, and her story is really powerful as well. And I think that was sort of an outstanding thing. And so that's one thing I try to, like I'm not necessarily a woman, but I want to try to bring as many women's perspective to light so that people understand some of the challenges, because I'm sure it was a little bit challenging to deal with that at the beginning. I know now it's not the same.
It was. I'll tell you one story. When I was in Angel, I had a lot of Korean men working under me, Korean that had just moved here, Korean. And within their culture, age is, they address each other. Like they will literally ask you how old you are, which is kind of rude in America. But they'll ask you how old you are so that they can address you appropriately within their culture. So I'm younger than them and I'm a female. And so they weren't very nice to me when they first started. But this is hilarious. They had some website that they looked up your birthday to find out your past life. And I told them my birthday, and it said I was like Confucius or something. And so then after that, they were so nice to me because I was some guru in a past life. But yeah, I definitely, and in Capcom in Osaka, I had a lot. The first 3 weeks, they thought I was there with Darren Bader, who was my art director, and they thought he was the boss. And I was just the secretary taking notes, but I was the lead. And so, it's just learning about cultures and that type of thing. And it's never been really important to me, that stuff. It will work its way out eventually. But yeah, it is tough when you first start out. Hopefully the numbers will start to change. And
And you are noticing. I mean, I know it's been I mean 20 years. Obviously, we're hoping that something would change, but you're noticing that it's definitely different now, right? That you're seeing more of that the diversity in the group.
For another example, I was at Image Metrics. I know my LinkedIn looks like a Twitter feed, but at least there's return customers.
Sure.
So I was at Image Metrics for a while, and Rockstar would literally have meetings where the TV's cut in a quadrant, and I would have Scotland, New York, Vancouver, and San Diego, and there would be 20 men in each quadrant and not one female at all that I'm talking to. At least today now, when I need to get back soon too, we're having our Zoom meetings with Epic. Mm-hmm. There's at least 10% women in these meetings now, which is nice. Yeah. I'm not the only one. So that's really nice. Yeah.
I remember I went to a conference, and this was back then it was in Malta, but it's called Trojan Horse Was a Unicorn. And one of the women came on stage and says, the best part of this conference is that there's a line for the women's restroom.
There's no line.
No, there was one. Meaning that there's enough women that they created had a line at the women's restroom.
Nice.
So that was the thing that she was saying. So it was really cool. All right. Yeah. I want to make sure we have enough time with you, because I know our time is running short. Tell me a little bit about your teaching, because I know you're very influential in that area too. How did you get into teaching, and what are some of the things that you have been taught and doing, and how did you get into it? Yeah.
So the very first time I taught, this school doesn't exist anymore, but it was back probably 2003 or 4. It was called DHIMA, and it was DHIMA, and it was all Japanese students. And I learned quick, because of my experience working in Osaka, I knew they're not going to ask me questions because they want to speak English perfectly. And so they just won't speak. So I had to say, you have a question. And then it would be the flood, of questions. They've been quiet for an hour as I've been lecturing. And then I taught, I guess the next one was Gnomon. I taught Creature there for a couple years. And that was fun, but they're really a modeling effectsy school. So it was very seasonal when they would get some people that wanted to learn animation, and then they would have no one wanting to learn. So it wasn't consistent enough. So then everything kind of came to a head in 2010 when I was working on Smurfs. I had decided I might go back to school and get my master's in painting, which is what's all back there. I live in a big loft downtown LA. And so I decided to go back to school at Laguna College of Art and Design. And I can't believe I did all this. So luckily, Troy, who sat right next to me on Stuart, was the animation director. And he worked it out that I could work my 50-hour week from Tuesday through Saturday. And then I went Monday to class down in Laguna. And then Sunday, I would do all my work and paint for class. I also, a couple nights a week, was teaching adjunct at USC Film School.
Oh, my God. So you were a student, a teacher, and working.
Yes. I was working in production on Smurfs. I was going to school part-time, getting my master's in painting, and I was teaching adjunct for USC. Wow. So over the course of the next 2 or 3 years, I managed to get the degree. I became a full-time professor at USC and had obviously cut back most of I worked on Avatar during the summer, stuff like that. Okay. I would go work on a show when I wasn't teaching. Sure. But yeah, so it was a big transition. And I stayed there till 2018. And I missed production. It just doesn't pay as well. I don't know what I was thinking. I thought, I'll make up the difference, working on the summers or whatever. But it's hard. It is really hard.
Sure.
But I have over 400 lectures now on Prezi ready to go anytime I need to teach anything. And
Nice.
so I just teach on the side now for iAnimate. It's a very different student. At USC, I taught both in the undergrad and the master's program. So undergrad, there's nothing like fall with 18-year-olds that have just graduated high school that are going to college.
Right.
And you're trying to teach them Maya. It doesn't matter, even if they've taken a computer class in high school. It's just, a sea of faces like that.
Right.
But yeah, I take great pride in a lot of the students that went through the program. There's one that actually works with me at Halon who is like, I've known him since he was 18 and he didn't know how to set a keyframe. And now he's working at Halon. He's one of their star animators. So it's really nice and gratifying to help someone on that kind of journey. The students that I have at iAnimate tend to be more people working in production and they don't quite have the demo reel yet. And they just need a little guidance. So instead of telling them how to build a watch, they just need someone to tell them what time it is, and get them to see what you see. Right. It keeps me young, talking to youngsters.
Yeah.
And it's just really gratifying. I'm grateful for being able to teach. Not everyone can do it. And it keeps me sharp too, because I have to label everything that I'm doing and explain why.
Yeah, I taught for a little bit, and there's no better way to learn than to teach.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because you have to know what you're saying. I think it was one of the first things, my very first class I was teaching. I think it was Maya, and this is, or no, it was Max at anyway. I went, people never used any CG at all. This is back in 97 or something like that. And I was writing it down on the board as like, rotation, translate, scale, like RTS, right? And just basics. And I turn around and I notice everyone's writing it in their notebooks. I'm like, oh no, they're listening to everything I'm saying. And I realized I better get this right.
Yeah. And USC really forced me to, because you're not just teaching how to execute, you have to teach them the what and the why. Like why, who are you? What kind of stories are you trying to tell? Because they have to make a film to graduate. And so it's one thing to just teach them how to use the tool. It's another thing to teach them how to think critically and ask themselves, who am I and why am I telling these stories in the first place? Sure. That's a tough one too. But it's, I really enjoy teaching. I probably will always do it. Like I said, the young people keep me young.
That's great. I mean, you've been obviously a mentor for a long time. Is this something that you enjoy doing, mentoring people and sort of helping people out, the young, as you say?
Yeah. I do. I mean, I think I find it interesting how each generation thinks and sees the world. I think that's really interesting to bounce against and help yourself question how you're growing as a human being, and not to get too hoity-toity existential or whatever. But how we see the world is really important on our perspective of everything. And so, I think mentoring is just such it really is, it gives back as much as you are giving.
That's awesome. Well, good. I'm glad you said that, because I think it's something that everyone needs to do, and especially if you start to succeed, you have to give back to the people.
Yeah, in some capacity, even if it's doing a podcast, you don't have to go out there and teach, but doing things so that you are grateful and contributing. Yeah,
for sure. Well, awesome. Listen, it's been about an hour, and it's been such a great conversation, and your story is wonderful, and I'm really glad to hear all these amazing things, and I'm glad we were able to share this with everyone. So thank you so much for doing this with us, Angie.
Thank you.